Okay, welcome everybody. Special event talk as part of the Chair in Transgender Studies Visiting Speaker Series, and we're really glad that everybody could join us, those of you here in the room and those of you online. I'm Aaron DeVore, and I'm the founder of the Chair in Transgender Studies and also the Transgender Archives and also the Moving Trans History Forward conferences. So we're at the University of Victoria. We start with a territorial acknowledgement. We acknowledge and respect the Lekwungen people on whose traditional territory the university stands, and the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanich peoples whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. Our work is to provide inspiration and hope to trans plus people and our allies everywhere. And we try to do this by contributing to the development and the communication of accurate, research-based, real-world knowledge about trans plus people. And we want to see that used to build a better world with better policies and laws and to drive social change. We also work to help build strong and resilient trans plus communities, and we do that through cultural activities, arts and social activities, and in all that we do. We're committed to applying an intersectional lens in our work to advance reconciliation, racial justice, equity, and inclusion for all. So in addition to events like today, we do a lot of other things. I mentioned, you saw in the video, world's largest transgender archives, and we'll be hearing a little bit about that, I think, in today's talk. We put on the international, interdisciplinary, and intergenerational Moving Trans History Forward conferences every 2 years, so please save the date. That's coming up in March, at the end of March 2025. We've got scholarships for UVic students, fellowships for people to come visit, and lots of arts and cultural events. Now, I have the pleasure of introducing Camryn Riccitelli, who is originally from San Diego, is a second-year MA student in the Department of Geography, working in the Geographic Indigenous Futures Lab. They received their BA in Geography and Environmental Studies from UVic in 2023, and their research focuses on the relationship between player and game and how games can be used as a tool for decolonization, education, and social change. The title of the talk is Roll for Perception, ROLL. Games as a Site of Decolonization and Social Change.
Yeah, so thank you for that introduction. Yeah, I'm Camryn Riccitelli, and I'm going to talk about games today. Before I start, I would like to recognize that I am not an Indigenous person, and I am a settler researcher exploring these topics. However, as a queer, gender non-conforming person, colonial structures and values such as the binary and the patriarchy negatively affect myself and my community as well, and the important work that Indigenous game developers do in countering settler colonialism through games benefits all those oppressed by those structures. So this research is very important to me, not just because I value unique and compelling games, but because I strongly believe that games aimed at decolonization can change the gaming industry for the better. Let's make sure that that works. Or not.
We've had a previous speaker, it's quite delayed sometimes.
Is that? Oh, there we go. Okay. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so just a little agenda for today. I'm going to give some context for my research, a bit about the theory, a bit about my methodology, results and analysis, and then discussion. Before I get into this topic that I love to talk about, I have some vocabulary that I would like to share with all of you so that we're all on the same page, because not everyone knows some of these words. Again, the delay. There we go. Okay. So PC means player character. That is the character that you play when you play a game. NPC, non-player character, those are the characters that you meet and interact with. RPG, that's a role play game. It can be either tabletop or video. TTRPG is specifically a tabletop role play game like D&D or Dungeons and Dragons. I say this because I use these abbreviations quite frequently, so I just want us all to be aware. Okay, so a bit about the background. The gaming industry is one of the fastest growing industries in the world today. In 2024 alone, the video games industry is expected to generate around 200 billion US dollars. The purchasing and playing of games rose dramatically both during and after the COVID-19 pandemic, as people sought games for entertainment during isolation and then rebuilding community and social interaction afterward. The main basis of this research is that humans can learn through play, and this is actually quite a well-researched topic within game studies. And it's been found that games can actively engage the player and teach difficult content by immersing them within their learning. A lot of this research is around primary and secondary school and games effectiveness in those settings. And then the ultimate thing, representation and decolonization. The gaming industry has traditionally been a cis white male dominated space, not only within the games being created, but the communities that grow from these games. So those toxic masculinity surrounding public chat rooms in online games like Call of Duty, for example. Not just video games, but tabletop games as well. So TTRPGs like D&D were created with white Eurocentric values in mind. And as people today are expanding and changing that, some of the D&D purists, which are generally older white men who originally played D&D when it was first created, take issue with that, making certain gaming spaces unwelcoming to others who are trying to get into tabletop role-play games. So overall, examining the role games can play in decolonization efforts will help unravel colonial structures within today's games and make gaming a more inclusive and rich experience. So this leads to the gap in knowledge that I'm aiming to address, which is the fact that there is little focus on player perception and how developers can actively decolonize the gaming experience. Many researchers have brought attention to the fact that settler colonialism and colonial values are present within games today. A lot of games I'm sure many of you have played, like Settlers of Catan, Monopoly, The Game of Life, Risk, Ticket to Ride, among many others. However, there's little focus on actively decolonizing that experience. So this leads to my overall research question, which is how can game developers design and mobilize games as a tool for decolonization, education, and social change? So what is an example of a colonial game? Catan, which was previously known as Settlers of Catan, they had a name change in 2015. There's three main mechanics for this game, and it's resource extraction, development, and expansion, which are three main mechanics of colonialism. An interesting fact is that the Dutch version of Catan was originally called, and I'm going to butcher this, but Kolonisten van Catan, which literally translates to colonists of Catan. So it's a game that is very much rooted in colonialism, whether that was intentional or not, and promotes those values that uphold colonial structures. And if we move to the next one. So what's an example of a decolonial game? So Coyote and Crow is a tabletop role-play game created by Connor Alexander, as well as a team of about 36 native game designers. And this is a game that is set in an alternate timeline from our own, in an indigenous future where colonization never happened. It is inherently decolonial because colonization didn't happen. What's really interesting about this game is that it encourages both native and non-native players to interact. And for native players, they have letters to players at the beginning of their guidebook. And for native players, they encourage them to bring aspects of their own communities and their own nations into the game. And for non-native players, they tell them to leave behind all their preconceived notions of what they know about Indigenous folks and Native Americans, because what they know isn't the same as what's in this world. And it's a very interesting setting. The world building is just amazing. And it's a really great opportunity to explore decolonization through role play with your friends, with your community members. And it's a really great game that I think everyone should check out. Okay, so moving on to a bit about the theoretical framework that I have situated my research within, and that is cultivation theory. So cultivation theory was popularized in the 1950s with the rise of television, and it essentially examines the lasting effects of media on consumers. It's not commonly used within geography, which is the department that I'm in. However, because I am focusing on a form of media, it fits very well for my purposes. So cultivation theory occurs through three forms of analysis. Institutional analysis, which examines the values behind the institution putting forth the content or the message. So that would be the game developers and the companies. Message system analysis, which examines the actual message or story that is being portrayed or told. So that is the games themselves. And then cultivation analysis, which examines the way in which consumers perceive the content and how it affects them. So that would be players and their experiences with the games. So I have two forms of data. I have primary data, which was 15 semi-structured interviews with the Galleon Gaming Society, which is a local gaming group here in Victoria. And then secondary data in the form of online statements, both from game review sites and forums, and then developer websites and game statements about the games themselves. So diving in a little bit more. So the interviews for participant recruitment for those interviews, the main way that the Galleon Gaming Society coordinates their events and communication is through Discord, which is a very popular social media, not really social media, but like communication platform for gamers. So I recruited mostly through Discord with a Google form allowing them to sign up. Once they signed up, they were given a letter of information for consent to understand what is being asked of them, what the intention behind this research is, and what will happen with their data. I provided three main formats to allow flexibility for the participants. So in-person interviews, interviews through email, and then interviews through Google Form. These interviews were very semi-structured. They occurred more like a conversation with 10 main guiding questions, which you can see on the right there, all to kind of understand the player's overall experience regarding any kind of game, regardless if it's Indigenous created or not. However, every participant recounted a time when they played a game from the perspective of someone different than themselves and learning something from that. Moving on to the secondary data and the online statements. So like I said, there's kind of two main ones. There's the gamer reviews, which focused on player experience specifically in regards to Indigenous designed or collaborated games like Never Alone or When Rivers Were Trails. And these were collected from popular game review platforms such as Steam, Metacritic, Roll3RPG, platforms like that. And then the developer statements were taken directly from Indigenous designed or collaborated games developer websites. And it was statements about both the developer intent and values and the intent behind the games that they were creating. Awesome. So I only recently finished data collection and coding, so analysis is still ongoing as I work through the writing and analysis process. I used NVivo for thematic analysis and coding, and the top 5 codes that I have are education, diversity, perspective, decolonization, and storytelling, among many others, but these were the ones that were most prevalent. And so the results that I have are from these 3 main sources: online reviews, participant experiences, and developer statements. And again, very recent, still a process, but from these results, I have organized them into 5 themes, which I would like to take you through now, and I reserve the right to change these themes as my research develops. But the first theme is that games can teach empathy. And throughout here, I have quotes from both the interviews and the online statements that you can read through if you like. So games can teach empathy both through perspective and immersion. And when I say perspective, I'm talking about how game developers utilize specific viewpoints and stories to immerse the player within that identity. So, for example, in the game When Rivers Were Trails, you play as a displaced Anishinaabe person dealing with the consequences of the Allotment Act in the 1800s. And you play from this person's perspectives and make choices as them. And by embodying a displaced Native person, the player has a more in-depth understanding of the challenges that they went through. And that's just one example of the way that perspective can be used to teach empathy through games. Yeah. The next theme, which kind of goes along with theme 1, is that games can change mindsets if those games are diverse. So if games can teach empathy, it can also be assumed that games can change mindsets. Games as an education tool can challenge players' biases and prejudices, and lay bare the truth of colonialism in an immersive and interactive way. So another example of a game, there is a TTRPG called Dog Eat Dog, which is a role-play game created by Evan Jones, wherein players control corporations, plundering the environment to produce assorted products to then sell for the highest price. The mechanics for the game recreate the oppressive culture of colonialism with hardcore rules, the main 2 being: 1, the Native people are inferior to the occupation people, and 2, the richest player plays the occupation. So when games present players with these really complex and challenging narratives and stories, I can allow them to kind of reevaluate their own mindsets and their own ways of thinking. The next theme, games contribute to social fabrics. This was a theme that I didn't necessarily expect from this research, but I'm very glad that it did. I think games contribute to social fabric in 2 main ways, by fostering discussion and broadening community. So many of the interview participants recounted the role games have played in building community in their own lives, and how they have met a wide variety of people that they may not have met otherwise if it weren't for playing games with them. Many people also shared their experiences diving into worlds and storylines in games with other players, and their experiences navigating conflict and difficult topics. The next theme is that players want diverse stories in games. By far the most common theme that I found in my research. Every interview participant and many of the online reviews said that they wished there were more diverse stories told through the games available to them. Many were tired of seeing video games being developed all with similar storylines. And tabletop players were seeking alternatives to the Eurocentric D&D-esque systems that have dominated the TTRPG world. No matter what format, many of the players have sent out a diversity bat signal, so to speak, in hopes that game developers will see it and take the hint that players want those diverse games available to them. And the final theme for my research that I have so far, again, subject to change, is that players want inclusivity. And they want inclusivity in three main areas of the gaming world, and that is in games, in companies, and in communities. I'm gonna change. Okay. So going into those three aspects of the gaming world, in games, similar to theme 4, players want more inclusivity in the games they play. This not only includes diversity in the stories told, but in the options available to players within games. Having greater representation in both player characters and NPCs. Increasing inclusivity in games could also occur through expanding the actual mechanics of games that limit players. So these are things like including expansive character creators in video games, including ways to include disabled characters in games like the accessibility toolkit for the Fate TTRPG system. And as well, guidebooks with tips on how game masters can introduce topics like colonization that could lead to really fruitful role play and discussion among players. In companies, players want inclusivity and in the perspectives and identities developing diverse games. For the most accurate and respectful representation, it is best to consult with the communities the game is about. Bringing in diverse developers with fresh creative ideas can result in the output of unique and quality games. And then finally, in communities, as previously stated at the beginning, many of the communities surrounding both video and tabletop games can be extremely toxic, just oozing with misogyny and racism and homophobia and every other ism and phobia under the sun. This makes not only getting into games difficult, but then building a network within playing difficult. A large part of gaming is social, and it's important that gaming communities are inclusive so that players can build those networks and strengthen that community. And these themes that I have explained kind of all contribute to the overarching theme or motif of decolonization and education, which is the ultimate goal of this research. So I've shown you quite a few quotes from all of the statements that I've collected, but I would like to take a moment to read to you one in particular. So Clee Benelli, who unfortunately recently passed away, was a Navajo activist and artist. And before he passed away, he created a game called Burn the Fort. And it's a game that is very much about colonialism and decolonialism. And this quote in particular from him, I think, perfectly describes the power games can have as a tool for decolonization. So I just like to take a moment to read this. Nearly every game available on the shelf today is rooted in colonialism and resource exploitation. I wanted to offer an alternative and challenge those narratives. This game focuses on the time period of the so-called Indian Wars to explore the history and offer an engaging and fun way of deepening our understandings of those times. For some people, this will be just another tabletop game. For others, and this is my intention, it can be one small way to engage and build cultures of resistance and liberation. Clee Benelli was a very intelligent and wonderful game creator and artist. All right, so my initial thoughts based on my analysis so far, again, subject to change and development. Ultimately, there needs to be more support and funding for Indigenous game developers and Indigenous games, not only so that more people can experience the games, but so Indigenous developers can create mechanically sound games that don't have bugs or glitches, and more people are drawn towards them because, as you can see, within the online statements I found, there weren't any negative comments about the games themselves and the content, but there were negative comments about the mechanics and the gameplay. So things like bugs and glitches and lagging. Unfortunately, the gaming industry is just that, an industry. And most large game studios are going to create the games that they know are going to make them the most money. These are games that usually cater to the cis-white colonial patriarchy. Games like first-person shooters or games about World War I and II, and including games where you have the option to play as a Nazi. Is that necessary? I don't think so, but maybe that's up for debate. Maybe not. Ultimately, the gaming world needs to diversify and tell those unique and compelling stories so that everyone has the chance to see themselves as the player character, or at the very least, not another generic white avatar. Although I am not finished with my analysis, I feel pretty confident in saying that games are an effective tool for decolonization and education, and that with proper tools, research, support, and collaboration, game developers can actively decolonize the gaming experience and create meaningful, engaging, story-driven games. I know I talked a little fast, but thank you for listening. And then I have some game recommendations if anyone is interested in getting into playing Indigenous tabletop or video games. They're all fun. They're all great. Some of them are still in development. For example, Never Alone 2. But yeah, that's it.
Thank you, everybody, for attending. I just wanted to say that this is an event from the Chair in Transgender Studies. We do all kinds of events and programming throughout the year. I've mentioned a couple of the things that we do. If you like what we do, please continue to help us to do this important work. So contrary to what most people think, Chair in Transgender Studies is not an endowed chair, and our survival depends on donations from people like you and people that you know who have lots of money, and also relies on the goodwill of UVic. So thank you to UVic for that. So if you're able, please donate now. You can see on the screen there's a couple of QR codes. You can click there. We can accept donations from the US or from Canada. And I really encourage people to set up a monthly donation so that we know that we have income coming in. Even $5 a month adds up to something. That's your coffee at Starbucks. So I encourage people to support us so that we can keep on going. We're at year 9, and we're coming up to a 10th anniversary soon. So thank you all for attending. Watch our newsletter, our social media, our website, and there'll be more events coming up. I told you about the ones that are coming up immediately, but we do things all year round. So thanks again for being part of us.